Imagine walking into any room and instantly understanding what everyone is thinking, feeling, and hiding beneath their words. Imagine having the quiet power to read people with such clarity that no lie confuses you, no emotion surprises you, and no intention slips past your awareness. Most people go through life guessing, assuming, reacting blindly to the behaviors of others, but there is a rare group of individuals who move differently. They observe, they decode, they respond with wisdom instead of impulse. This book reveals how to become one of them. What you are about to hear is not a collection of tricks. It is a deep transformation in the way you see human behavior. You will learn how to detect the signals people send without knowing, how to interpret tone and body language with precision, and how to understand the emotional patterns that shape every action. You will see the hidden stories behind expressions, the truth behind silence, and the real motives behind conflicts, kindness, tension, or trust. If you have ever been manipulated, misunderstood, lied to, or overwhelmed by someone's emotions, this guide will show you how to protect yourself. If you have ever wished to connect better, communicate smarter, or navigate relationships without confusion, you are in the right place. This is a journey into the psychology of people, but more importantly, into the wisdom of responding with intention. Get ready for a mental upgrade, because once you learn how to read people and respond with calm intelligence, your relationships change, your confidence grows, and your life becomes a whole lot easier. Stay with me until the end. What you're about to discover can shift the way you interact with every single person you meet. Chapter 1. The Quiet Art of Seeing. Imagine walking into a room and feeling like you finally have a map of the people inside it. Not a list of faces, but a subtle cartography of intentions, moods, and unspoken priorities. The first skill this book teaches is simple in theory and difficult in practice. Learning to see without wanting to act immediately. Seeing means noticing micro details that most people miss because they are busy rehearsing responses. It begins with slowing down your eyes and your breath at the same time. When you do that for just a few seconds, you notice two things that most people never register: the baseline and the deviation. Baseline is how someone shows up when they are calm, comfortable, and not under pressure. Deviation is the tiny change when something matters or when a story inside them shifts. The chapter opens with a story of a teacher named Hannah, who had a habit of answering before students finished questions. She believed she was helping until a colleague suggested she try a small experiment. Listen to the last 3 words of each question and then wait 2 seconds before responding. The pause felt awkward for a week, then it revealed itself as a lens. Students began to add depth, to correct themselves, and to show the real concern behind their words. That 2-second window is the gateway to seeing. The book explains practical things to watch for. Micro-expressions that flash for less than a second and then hide, the rate at which shoulders drop or tighten, the direction of someone's gaze as they name a person or a goal, and the tiny adjustments in tone when content is rehearsed versus when it is raw. Seeing is not a trick to catch people out. It is a responsibility to understand them better. The chapter cautions against harvesting observations into instant judgments. Good seeing generates questions, not verdicts. When you notice a discrepancy, a smile that does not reach the eyes, a sudden tightening at a casual remark, or a person who avoids naming a name, translate that discrepancy into a soft hypothesis. Perhaps they are anxious about the topic, or perhaps they are protecting someone, or perhaps they are performing. Hypotheses are invitations to curiosity. Chapter 2, Listening to the Unsaid. The second skill is listening not only for words, but for absence, for the deliberate or accidental gaps that contain the most honest information. This chapter reframes silence as data and quiet as an honest speaker. Most people fear silence because they think it needs to be filled. The book flips that fear into a tool. The narrative follows Daniel, a manager who had learned to speak more in meetings to speed decisions, only to find that his team followed his talk and ignored complex issues. A coach asked him to try a minimal intervening question and then stay silent. The silence produced a cascade of disclosures. Team members filled the gap with constraints, fears, and actual problems that otherwise would have been invisible. Listening to the unsaid also involves tracking topic avoidance. When a person consistently steers a conversation away from a theme, the avoidance itself becomes an important signal. The author offers a soft method for exploring avoidance. Name it gently as curiosity. Say something like, "I noticed we shift away from this topic. I'm curious what makes it hard to talk about." This framing reduces defensiveness and invites the other person to look inside their avoidance with you. Another chapter section explores the rhythm of answering: rushed, deferred, rehearsed, or delayed. A rushed answer often signals either overconfidence or a desire to control the narrative. A delayed answer can mean careful thinking, evasiveness, or emotional overwhelm. The skill is not to label, but to test. Use small probes. Can you give an example of that? What would you want to change if you could? The probes convert silence and evasion into concrete data. Listening also includes political listening, which means being attuned to who is left out of conversations and whose voice is minimized. The book shows how leaders who listen for absence create more inclusive environments by explicitly inviting quieter voices and making space for different timing preferences. The chapter shares micro-practices for daily life. Use the 5-second rule. Wait 5 seconds after someone stops speaking before you reply, and use the mirror phrase. Repeat the last few words the person said as a question to encourage elaboration. Both habits increase the subtleties you can catch and slow the pace so that more depth emerges. Ethical notes recur. Listening deeply is intimate and must be handled with consent and kindness. If you learn something painful about someone, your role is not to expose but to offer support or to redirect to appropriate help. The chapter ends with an exercise in patient curiosity. In your next meaningful conversation, commit to 2 silent minutes distributed across the talk and take notes of any new information that surfaces during those pauses. When you practice listening to the unsaid, you will find that conversations grow richer and answers become truer because people are given the space to reveal themselves rather than being hurried into a polished performance. Chapter 3. Signals, Context, and Stories. People do not speak in vacuum. They speak within contexts and stories that give signals meaning. This chapter teaches how to triangulate micro-signals with context so you avoid dangerous overconfidence. The main idea is simple. A signal is not evidence until you check it against context and history. The book tells the story of Rosa, who misread a client's curt emails as disinterest and nearly walked away from a profitable relationship. A quick history check revealed that the client was under personal stress, handling legal issues, and had limited bandwidth. The curt tone was not rejection, it was scarcity. Context is also temporal. People's behavior changes across cycles: stress, celebration, grief, and transition. A single observation during a crisis is not a stable trait. The text gives practical heuristics for triangulation. First, seek baseline. How does this person behave in ordinary conditions? Second, seek corroboration. Do other signals align? Body language, timing, and choice of words? Third, weigh alternatives. What else might explain the pattern? Finally, test with a small probe that could disconfirm your reading. Triangulation reduces false positives and increases humility. The chapter deepens into narrative psychology. People interpret signals through stories they hold about others. If you believe someone is unreliable, you will notice behavior that confirms that belief and miss counter-evidence. The remedy is explicit story testing. When you notice a pattern, articulate the story you are telling yourself and label it as a story, not a fact. Then design a test. Ask a clarifying question, check a data point, or observe without acting for a week. The book provides examples of story tests that are gentle and practical, such as asking for a specific example of a promised action, or setting a small shared deadline and watching follow-through. There's also a section on cultural and situational context. Gestures and silence have different meanings across cultures and settings. The author urges readers to learn local norms before drawing bold conclusions. This humility increases accuracy and prevents embarrassing missteps. Finally, the chapter introduces a small toolkit for storing observations ethically, a private notebook where you record baseline, deviation, and the probe result. Over months, this ledger becomes a personalized guide for reading recurring people in your circle. The point is not to build dossiers for manipulation, but to reduce costly misunderstandings and respond with informed compassion. When you combine signals with context and test your stories, reading people becomes less about guessing and more about careful, actionable insight. Chapter 4. Deception, Truth, and Compassion. Detecting deception is a magnet for self-help seekers, but this chapter reframes the topic in humane, practical terms. Deception is not a mystical skill you master in a weekend. It is a probabilistic judgment that combines baseline knowledge, multiple signals, and respectful testing. The chapter starts with a cautionary tale of a parent who wrongly accused a teenager due to a single mismatched sign and created a trust wound that took years to heal. The lesson is brutal and important. False positives damage relationships. The book offers a calibrated approach to suspicion. First, gather baseline data over time rather than leaping on one discrepancy. Second, look for clusters of mismatch across channels, words, affect, behavior, and timing, rather than a single cue. Third, use low-cost prompts that are ethical and repairable, such as asking for specifics or requesting a simple verification. The chapter outlines common deception patterns and why they are unreliable on their own. Eye contact varies. Nervous gestures have many causes. Elaborate stories can be honest attempts to recall detail. The skillful reader treats signals as questions, not accusations. The humane dimension is essential. Often people deceive to avoid shame, to protect others, or because they are in pain. When you suspect deception, consider motives and consequences before acting. A gentle calibration question buys information and preserves dignity. I might be misunderstanding. Could you help me understand exactly how that happened? This phrasing opens space for correction and explanation without cornering someone. The chapter also addresses self-deception. We lie to ourselves to avoid change or to protect fragile identities. Detecting your own evasions requires solitude and curiosity. Practices like journaling, peer feedback, and explicit accountability reduce the fog of self-deception. The ethical heart of the chapter is repair. When misreadings occur, apologize quickly, correct the record, and adjust your methods. When deception is confirmed and consequences matter, escalate with care and evidence rather than with moral fury. The chapter concludes with a supportive framework: curiosity first, clarification second, and corrective action third. This sequence keeps relationships intact while protecting yourself and others. The humane reader recognizes that truth matters and that the pursuit of truth, handled well, strengthens connection rather than destroys it. Chapter 5. Responding with wisdom. Reading people creates options. Responding wisely converts options into better outcomes. This chapter is pragmatic about response strategies: non-reactive, clarifying, containing, and generative. Non-reactive responses buy time and prevent escalation. They are useful when you detect high emotion or an ambiguous signal. A simple non-reactive phrase is, "I hear you, let me think about that," and then breathe. Clarifying responses convert fuzzy signals into concrete data. Can you tell me one example of that? Containing responses soothe and stabilize overwhelmed people. "I'm here with you. We'll tackle this step by step." Generative responses move systems forward by proposing specific next steps that resolve ambiguity. Based on what you said, here is one possible plan we could try. The chapter gives vivid examples. In a team meeting where a teammate lashes out, a leader who contains by acknowledging the feeling and then clarifies the problem avoids shutdown and invites solutions. In personal conflict, a partner who listens, reflects emotion, and then offers a small, constructive step changes the trajectory of the argument. The author teaches a decision tree to select response types, assess intensity and clarity, then choose containment for high intensity and low clarity, clarification for low intensity and high ambiguity, non-reactive when you need time, and generative when you have enough information and want to move. The chapter also emphasizes tone and timing. The same word said with a hurried tone will be heard as dismissal. The same proposal delayed may be perceived as indifference. Chapter 6. Building trust quickly and safely. Trust is not given, it is earned in small deposits and visible behaviors, and this chapter teaches how to make those deposits quickly without appearing manipulative or fake. Imagine walking into a room where everyone has an invisible ledger and every interaction writes a tiny entry into the trust column or the distrust column. The difference between a quick ally and a guarded stranger often comes down to micro-investments that signal reliability, competence, and warmth. The chapter opens with a story of Layla, a project manager who discovered that the fastest way to convert skeptical stakeholders into collaborators was not with persuasive slides or louder arguments, but with predictable, low-risk follow-through. She began to intentionally return small favors within 24 hours, to show up exactly 5 minutes early to meetings, and to summarize agreements in a one-line note that made obligations visible and verifiable. These tiny acts created a predictable rhythm that others read as competence and care. The book breaks trust building into 3 live signals: clarity, consistency, and calibrated vulnerability. Clarity means making intentions explicit and reducing ambiguity. When people understand what you will do and when, they mentally reduce the cost of relying on you. Consistency is the cadence of small promises kept. A single, reliable micro-behavior repeated over weeks outranks grand but inconsistent gestures. Calibrated vulnerability is the humanizing element, offering a short, personal detail that is real but safe, the kind of disclosure that invites reciprocity without overexposing you. The chapter shows how to use these signals ethically by always aligning vulnerability with function. A single, brief admission of uncertainty, followed by a concrete next step. "I'm not sure about the timeline, here's a proposal to test," often deepens trust rather than undermines it. Practical exercises populate the text. Start with the 48-hour rule. When someone asks for help, respond within 2 days, even if you cannot fully solve the problem. A brief status update reduces anxiety and increases perceived reliability. Another practice is the summary habit. After any agreement, send a one-sentence recap of who does what by when. This short ritual turns promises into small contracts. The chapter also warns about speed traps. Trying to accelerate trust by oversharing or by promising more than you can deliver backfires swiftly. Instead, design low-cost commitments that you can complete and scale them. There is also cultural nuance. In some contexts, warmth precedes competence, while in others, demonstrating the skill first earns the right to be warm. The text recommends simple contextual probes. Observe how people respond to small favors and adjust the ratio of warmth to competence accordingly. The ethical compass of the chapter is clear. Trust building is meant to create mutual safety, not to manipulate outcomes. Use the skill to protect people from harm, to facilitate collaboration, and to increase clarity. Spotting early signals of distrust is part of the craft. Micro-defensive gestures, rapid topic changes, or evasive timelines. And the remedy is low-risk transparency. Validate the other person's concern, restate your understanding, and propose one small, verifiable action to rebuild the ledger. The chapter closes with a story of Layla, who, by choosing small, visible acts over persuasive speech, transformed skeptics into staunch supporters and discovered that trust is less about personality and more about predictable human-scale reliability that can be practiced and taught. Chapter 7. Asking better questions. From interrogation to insight. The quality of your questions often determines the quality of the answers you receive. And this chapter turns question-making from a reflex into a deliberate craft designed to reveal motivations, constraints, and hidden information without coercion. The narrative begins with Michael, a sales director, who learned the hard way that talking less and asking better questions closed deals more often than slick presentations. He transformed his discovery calls by using layered questions that moved from descriptive to reflective to future-oriented. Start with concrete facts, then invite the person to interpret them, and finally ask about preferred outcomes. This structure, the book argues, reduces defensiveness and surfaces underlying drivers. The chapter introduces question types and their purpose. Descriptive questions gather baseline data and reduce mistaken assumptions. Tell me what happened in that meeting. Reflective questions elicit internal states and beliefs. How did that project feel for you? Future-oriented questions focus choice and commitment. If that barrier were removed, what would you do next? Skillful questioners weave these types into conversational arcs that convert confusion into clarity. There are powerfully practical tools here. Use the clarifying pivot when you hear jargon or vagueness. Can you give me a specific example of that? Use the curiosity buffer to slow heated exchanges. I'm genuinely curious about what led you to that conclusion. Tell me more. And use the constraint probe to surface hidden limitations. What resource would make this possible right now? The author emphasizes tone and pacing. Questions asked with impatience or as a rapid-fire salvo put people on guard. Questions asked gently and with a listening posture invite honesty. The chapter also tackles the ethics of questioning. Questions can be invasive or leading. The reader is urged to prefer open invitations over traps. Ask to understand, not to score points. Real-world scenarios demonstrate how subtle changes in phrasing altered outcomes. A manager who used directive why questions found defensive answers. When she rephrased to what happened and what you notice now, she received thoughtful reflections and co-created solutions. The chapter closes with a daily practice designed to sharpen questioning skills. Pick 3 conversations and commit to asking follow-up questions rather than offering solutions, noting how much new information you learn and how relationships shift when people feel heard. When you habituate curiosity-driven questioning, you transform interactions from battlegrounds into laboratories of insight. Chapter 8. Managing high-stakes conversations without losing yourself. Difficult conversations are inevitable, and the difference between escalation and resolution often rests on small choices in preparation, framing, and pacing. This chapter is a manual for conducting important talks where emotions, status, and stakes collide, and where the listener must both read accurately and respond wisely. The chapter opens with a tense boardroom example where a poorly framed product failure discussion turned into a public blame session until a leader paused the meeting and proposed a new rule. Describe outcomes first, then propose causes privately. The procedural change shifted the tone and turned threat into problem-solving. The book lays out a preparation sequence. Clarify your purpose, anticipate possible reactions, and decide on one non-negotiable outcome you need from the conversation. Clarity of purpose prevents derailment. Next is the opening frame. Start by naming the shared goal and the reason for the talk, then ask permission to proceed. Permission lowers threat because it restores agency to the other person. During the conversation, the author recommends a triage approach. When emotions spike, slow down and switch to containment. Acknowledge the feeling, offer a short, grounding phrase, and pause for breath. Use clarifying and generative questions to move from accusations to specifics and then to options. The chapter emphasizes the value of time-limited experiments. When stuck, propose a small test to gather data rather than committing to a full-scale change immediately. This reduces fear of irreversible consequences. There are communication anchors provided. Use and statements to connect emotion and intent. For example, I hear your frustration, and I want us to find a workable next step. This keeps empathy visible while moving toward action. The text also addresses power dynamics. When you are in authority, the chapter counsels explicit invitation to feedback and the use of private follow-ups to prevent public humiliation. When you are lower in hierarchy, it teaches scripted assertiveness, use facts, set boundaries, and propose manageable alternatives. The ethical dimension is prominent. Hard conversations are not an arena for moral victory, but an opportunity to resolve problems in service of a larger purpose. The chapter ends with a rehearsal practice. Script the opening line, practice a calming anchor, and identify one micro-offer you can make to show constructive intent. These small rehearsals convert anxiety into preparation and increase the likelihood that the conversation produces clarity rather than collateral damage. Chapter 9. Influence and Persuasion. Without manipulation. Influence is a subtle craft of aligning interests and framing options so others choose what is mutually beneficial, and this chapter reframes persuasion from coercion into design of choices that respect autonomy while clarifying advantages. The narrative traces the arc of influence through stories of negotiators who replaced pressure with principled offers and saw more durable agreements. The core principles laid out are reciprocity, clarity of benefit, and choice architecture. Reciprocity is not transactional obligation, but the human tendency to respond in kind. Small, helpful acts increase openness to ideas. Clarity of benefit means explicitly stating what's in it for the other party and how their costs are minimized. Choice architecture is about setting the frame, present, limited, well-designed options, rather than an open-ended buffet that induces decision paralysis. The chapter provides practical templates when proposing a change. Lead with the problem you want to solve, present 2 or 3 simple options with trade-offs, and recommend one while inviting the other party to adjust. This format reduces resistance because people feel they still have agency. The text cautions against dark patterns and manipulative tactics. Ethical persuasion binds the persuader to follow through on promises and to avoid hidden costs. Stories illustrate the long-term cost of manipulation. Short-term wins turn into burned bridges when promises reveal fine print. The chapter also explores the role of narrative. People make decisions through stories. Framing an option within a narrative that connects to values often increases uptake more than raw facts. Use micro-stories, one-sentence case studies that show outcomes to translate abstract proposals into lived experience. Finally, influence requires readiness to accept no. The author teaches a graceful fallback script when resistance persists. Thank you for your honesty. May I ask, what would make this acceptable? This bridges negotiation to understanding and preserves relationship. Influence, when practiced ethically, becomes a way to create aligned action and to design systems where people choose welfare-enhancing options because they see the logic and the care in the offer. Chapter 10. Practice, reflection, and a commitment to better responses and a short conclusion. Mastery of reading people and responding wisely is iterative, and the last chapter turns the book into a long-term practice manual rather than a quick fix. The final sections provide a sustainable cycle: observe, hypothesize, probe, respond, and reflect. The author offers practical routines for each phase. Observation can be cultivated with a daily 5-minute field note, where you record one meaningful signal and one question it raises. Hypothesizing is the habit of turning observations into tentative stories and writing them down as testable propositions. Probing is the art of designing small, low-cost experiments or conversational prompts that confirm or disconfirm hypotheses. Responding is the disciplined choice of the response type covered earlier: contain, clarify, generate. And reflecting is a short, non-judgmental review where you document what you learned and what you will try next. The chapter includes a weekly calibration practice. Share anonymized cases with a trusted peer and ask for alternative readings. Exposure to other perspectives reduces blind spots and improves accuracy over time. There is also advice on emotional maintenance, regular solitude, journaling, and safe debriefs to prevent burnout from the cognitive and moral load of deep reading. The conclusion is humane and practical. The ability to read people and respond with wisdom does not make you infallible. It makes you more useful, more patient, and more effective in relationships. The final invitation is simple. Start with curiosity, choose one reading technique to practice this week, and commit to the reflective loop. Over months, the small compound effects of better seeing, kinder assumptions, clearer questions, and calibrated responses will change the texture of your life. You will find fewer wasted conflicts, more honest conversations, and a steadier capacity to act with care. The book closes by reminding the reader that wisdom in response is not about control, but about creating worlds where people can be more understood and thus more whole. Practice the craft, respect the ethical boundaries, and let the evidence of your practice guide your growth.